there's
Hello there, this is the first of a 5-part series on this podcast, and we take you into a roundtable engagement hosted by Sfundo, Mafuyeka, and here's what you can expect to hear in this episode of Katleho Pining Roundtable.
We will make a grievous mistake if we say there is nothing at all that SRC have fought for.
The SRC cannot operate outside of that framework. So do we blame the SRC or do we blame people that are responsible for formulating policies that guide SRCs in terms of how they operate?
Into a culture where there's no student activism, because you don't have a mass meeting body that holds the SRC accountable. The SRC holds itself accountable and is only accountable to the student structures.
There are 19 members sitting in the council, 2 of them of which they are from a student representative in the form of president and the secretary general. Even if they were to raise student issues, I mean, if the entire management or the entire council disagrees with them, there's nothing that they can do. At some point, they can even take a meeting to cosmos without informing the SRC, and they can take decisions without the SRC being. The SRC being there, it does not really matter.
So the SRCs have always been at the helm of changing the higher education landscape to ensure that black students that come from historically disadvantaged backgrounds are able to access higher education. And you need those structures because you can't take all the students to go and speak on their behalf.
Yes, SRC cannot bring about the change, but I don't think SRC in this instance are the ones to be blamed. I think the framework or the structure in which they operate is the one to be blamed.
It is suffice to first and foremost highlight that all over the world, previously and now, there hasn't been a single society that has brought liberation of its people through elections and parliamentary processes alone. Thank you for downloading this podcast. It forms part of a 5-part series which takes you into a roundtable engagement, as I've said at the beginning. But before we dive into the full engagement, Sfundo, the convener and facilitator of the sitting, had prepared a document which introduced the topic of engagement for this particular sitting. This was the second roundtable engagement, and it was on the 16th of May 2019. And the topic was in fact a question asking, can SRC elections bring about the liberation of students from the brutality of the higher education system? He says, it is suffice to first and foremost highlight that all over the world, previously and now, there hasn't been a single society that has brought liberation of its people through elections and parliamentary processes alone. Parliamentarism all over the world, previously and now, has proven to be nothing other than talking shops where parliamentarians adopt policies that they do not intend to implement. However, they do that because they want to mislead the non-questioning masses of our people into believing that there is something done in parliament which will bring about their liberation. Parliamentarian slogan is just to lull the unsuspecting masses of our people to sleep. One can refer to the Russian Revolution, then proceed to French Revolution and sundry. The liberation of people has always been brought by mass actions and demonstrations, shaking the very exploitative establishment that thrives on the exploitation and continued oppression of the oppressed. I start with this because I want people to relate SRC elections to the mainstream politics in South Africa and internationally. I'm sure the advisor to the Vice Chancellor, who was present in the sitting, will agree with me that since from his time as a student activist, they never won battles relating to students' issues in the boardroom alone. They had to from time and again engage on mass demonstrations or actions, for it is a fact that university management will never heed or respond to the students without students having to go to the streets to make their voices heard. For student representatives, before elections, they make all sorts of promises to students. However, after they have been elected to office, they stand above and become isolated to students who elected them to office. They tend to represent agendas of those who did not elect them. They use SRC budgets not to better the lives of students in institutions of higher learning. They, however, use it to live an opulent lifestyle. They use it to go to Dubai under the pretext of benchmarking. Such actions undermine the whole purpose of elections and the need to liberate our students from the yoke of higher education exploitation and oppression. Student representatives even ignore the mandate given to them by student formation that deployed them to office. structures, for they consider themselves to be bigger than those structures, for they know that even those leading those structures are in the pockets of those that are running the show. Even if student representatives were to advocate for student issues within the council, they wouldn't be able to emerge. Mind you, there are 19 council members. Well, of course, that includes 2 members of the institutional SRC. Automatically, they are outnumbered. Any meeting could even sit without them being present. Therefore, this could mean that decisions are sometimes taken without them, and they are forced to toe the line, or else they are rendered useless. So student representatives being in council is just ceremonial. However, it will never do anything that seeks to liberate students exploited and oppressed by the higher education process. Now, this has resulted in students taking matters to themselves to communicate with management through violence, for they know that the only language that university management of all institutions of higher learning understands is violence. They disrupt classes, burn cars, and engage in all kinds of violence. So they disrupt classes, burn cars, and engage in all kinds of violence so that they could be heard by the management of the university. This should demonstrate that SRC elections can never bring about the change that is required by students, just like the mainstream elections and parliament can never bring about the change needed by society. So what is to be done? That was the presentation written by Sfundo, and now I take you straight into the conversation.
We are now going to allow comrades to engage on the topic. Perhaps, I don't know, leadership Rakomo. Okay, no, it's fine. Mahatla, you are granted the general.
Yeah, thanks, boss. Now, I agree with you when when you say that SRC elections can never bring about the change that is necessary. In as far as making this environment conducive for learning for students. But now the big question is, who's to blame, really? Do we blame the SRC themselves? Do we blame the structures within the university? Because if you have to check, the SRC operates within a constitution or policies of the university, meaning that the SRC cannot operate outside of that framework. So do we blame the SRC, or do we blame people that are responsible for formulating policies that guide SRCs in terms of how they operate? Second to that, I'm referring to experience here, comrades. I don't know, Bas, if you agree with me that half of the things, in as far as how the university operates, you only learn them towards the end of your term, because you have many other obligations as a student. But remember that there's classes in between, there's practicals in between, there's all kinds of commitment, social life, and so forth. So I do agree with you, Mafuyeka, in short, that comrades, yes, the SRC cannot bring about the change, but I don't think SRC in this instance are the ones to be blamed. I think the framework, or the structure in which they operate, is the one to be blamed. Sure, Mafuyeka.
So in the University of Venda, when they decide to redirect the budget of SRC to better the lives of students, are you saying that is also part of the policies? Because you know that in some universities, what they do, they take the SRC budget, they buy food for students, for those needy students, and also they buy sanitary towels. I'm not sure if that is also part of the policies of the university, as you have suggested yourself. Yeah, but I'm going to allow leadership to speak for now. Yes, leadership.
Critically speaking, Comrade Sfundo, I don't think the document is critical enough, particularly because it seeks to undermine democratic processes. In that liberation cannot necessarily be violence. And the whole process of a student battle or war is to create peace and stability, right? You fight for student exclusion so that they can be in a university of higher learning and have a better life. So you don't engage in a constant violent mode of struggle for the sake of it, or for trying to look militant, but it's to force the system to change. However, when you've got democratic processes that must be used fundamentally to change society, because this thing of SRC, by the way, it did not come about because there's democratic process. Students themselves had to fight, historically. Whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Africa. Students had to fight to be included within the system of higher education. And that's why today you've got SRC being regulated as a stakeholder within higher education. And it is there to represent the student voice, right? When you read the SRC constitution, it's very clear that the mass body of the students take the highest decision-making body, which do not happen in many institutions of higher learning. You hardly hear that there was a mass meeting in TUT. Actually, in TUT we have a culture where there's no student activism, because you don't have a mass meeting body that holds the SRC accountable. The SRC holds itself accountable and is only accountable to the student structures. But if you read the SRC constitution itself, as being born out of the Higher Education Act, you would actually realize that SRCs are given much bigger responsibility to transform society. They're not doing it. And you can't blame therefore the structure when you've got a corrupt crop of leaders. We changed a number of issues when we were in the SRC. We were able to change most of the strikes actually that has been in TUT. It was because of the SRC that led those strikes. It has been the SRC in number of strikes that has been suspended. So the SRCs have always been at the helm of changing the higher education landscape to ensure that black students that come from historically disadvantaged backgrounds are able to access higher education. And you need those structures, because you can't take all the students to go and speak on their behalf. You know, that's why I'm saying that the activism and the social link between the student and the student leaders, that is where the problem is. And that's why you don't have mass meetings. And some of the problems that has come about is because management has put as a form of temptation what we call SRC benefits. Comrade Mahedi will tell you that at some point as PASMA we had a document on the abolishment of SRC benefits, because we had seen the SRC benefits as bringing wrong elements within the student leadership, that should you remove the benefits, you are going to therefore begin to have selfless leaders that are going to be serious about engaging on student struggles. And we took that debate to the Congress of PASMA, and we won that debate. Unfortunately, because of a lot of opportunism that manifests itself within the student movement itself, you would find that it is rejected and is not implemented. But we're taking that radical decision because looking into the decay of the character and culture of a student leader that was produced as a result of the benefits, that people will therefore then join the SRC as a result of what they can be able to achieve out of that. And I think that moving forward into this document, we must look into some of these issues that affect the quality of leadership and the selfless leaders that we need, that are affected by the benefits associated thereof. But I don't think the problem is with the structure per se, because if the structure is adhered to, and the policies of the SRC and the manner in which it's supposed to represent students happen in a manner that there's a social link between the student struggles, the students, and the leaders, you'll begin to see that particular shape and change, Comrade Sfundo, that you would like to see, because you are given an opportunity to participate in all structures of power. And if you're not happy, you go back to the mass body and report. That we try to tackle 1-2 issue. Unfortunately, we could not be able to change this matter in council. Perhaps it is time that we must be able to protest and take particular actions. But I think that the SRC structures remain very relevant, forever remain relevant. SRC remains relevant everywhere. It is only because of the food, the temptation of these privileges and the business people thereof, that are starting to also circle. That is why we had called also in that document we had written that all university services should be under the university control. We wrote those documents looking into what they are doing to student leadership. It's because of those privileges. 2, because of the privatization of student services, like buses, security, and all those things that used to belong to the university. Most of the services you see today used to belong to the university, by the way, long time ago. This thing of privatization came in with the result of merger and the changing landscape of higher education, and a lot of services of students were privatized. But security used to be on the campus. The university used to have its own buses, and all bus drivers used to work for the university. It's not a new thing, this thing that is happening now. It's not new. So, then you've got these business people that, because they want to influence certain particular issues, and student leaders find themselves within positions of authority, are therefore susceptible to fraud. and susceptible to bribe. And that in itself changes the character and nature of SRCs into the elitist that we see of the culture of today. But I think we must speak more primarily, Comrade Sfundo, to those particular benefits. I think on the next chapter we'll debate about democracy, because I see you are taking democratic institutions in the main, and they must be respected. Democracy, parliamentarism has to go with the elections, and it has to do with the strategic link between the society and its leadership. Is that how then do you regulate society? So we'll go then to that next part. I just wanted to say the SRCs remain relevant. However, there's other issues that are surrounding the SRCs that are a problem. And I'll pause it right there.
No, thank you. We know that in many times the management is always against student leaders. I've also highlighted here that there are 19 members sitting in the council, 2 of them of which they are from student representative in the form of president and the secretary general. Even if they were to raise student issues, I mean, if the entire management or the entire council disagrees with them, there's nothing that they can do. At some point, they can even take a meeting to what you call that place, to Cosmos, without informing the SRC, and they can take decisions without the SRC being there. So at some point, the SRC being there, it does not really matter. Because if the management decide on the issues to see that on this issue was no, then there's nothing that they can do, because that would have been the decision of the majority of the board members. So that is my submission. I'm not sure if is there any person who wants to have a view on that. TJ.
Thank you very much, Sfundo. I want to say the SRC matters in the council, because now remember when SRC. When Bo Sobuga, they said they want a student to be represented, they said as to whenever there's a decision that is to be taken about the university that is going to affect the students, should be communicated to by the student leaders. They must have representative, like Mafuyeka outlined to say, you cannot allow students to go there as 68,000 as they are to go and represent their views and to take decisions. So student leaders, the only problem that we have with student leaders is that they do not report back to the ground. They are only after the material benefit, like Mafuyeka has outlined, they are failing to address serious issues that needs to be addressed in the university, like the issue of running times for what in campus, the issue of toilets. For an example, the toilets in Building 21 are not conducive for students. Those are the issues that they need, because students cannot just come and say, we would like to see these particular changes. But now it becomes it comes to a point whereby SRC becomes arrogant to a point whereby after electing them, they think they are representing the people from their own political structure. Failing to forget that whenever you are into SRC, you are representing each and every student, irrespective of political affiliation. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you very much for your submission. Leadership, the survival come after. Leadership.
From your input, there's a question you end with, which is what is to be done. And I so wish we can challenge ourselves to really ask, what is this envisaged university we are looking for? Because we are in higher education today, the landscape of higher education today that was fought for to be what it is today. And probably comrades around 1976, when they were fighting for transformation of higher education, they were hoping that a space like this one is a step in the right direction, at which comrades, from time to time, society is not locked in a remote space where it cannot progress forward. You've got to allow every generation to define the challenges they see today and what do they think should be their own future. But if we rubbish, the university we have today, and by university I don't mean TUT, but I mean higher education as it is today, and not be able to point that there are commendable things in the higher education space, and there has been a particular progress to where we are. We will give one side of criticism that that will not point to us what exactly are we looking for in a university. In the context of SRC, we will make a grievous mistake if we say there is nothing at all that SRC have fought for, because we will fail to even point out, say for instance post 1994, to even point out number of struggles that were waged by student leaders, and those struggles could only be possible to a large extent through the role of SRC itself. SRC has become a body, if you may like, that has been able to organize the students. If you look at the trends of number of protests that we're even talking about, if you may like, SRC is actually at the forefront of many of these particular protests. In certain cases, it is former SRC members who have been exposed to how the university is organized, how decisions are taken, that a person is able to come and say, but we must challenge the vice chancellor on this, because we know during our term this decision, we took this kind of a decision, and today there's suddenly a change in terms of what the decision would have taken. Fees Must Fall itself was so well coordinated, not because the student movement in the country was led correctly, not because SASCO was led by Makomboti, who was clear, or Mpomo Rulan was good. It is because in universities you began to see a new culture of resistance, a culture that says we cannot take anymore this exorbitant tuition fees and accommodation fees. And having negotiated over a period of time, it is SRC itself that requested mass meetings to address students and said, look, we went into the boardroom, we have failed, and what then becomes a way forward. That is still part of the role that we say this vehicle should continue to be as accountable as possible, but responsive as well, to the needs of the students. In your document, you then say the liberation, no liberation has been brought about through elections and parliamentary processes, and I think that thesis there has to be corrected. Elections and parliamentary process are very different processes. So let's say in the context of the university, if you choose to say there should not be elections, you are looking for something else that could even probably be disastrous, because you seem to suggest that we must subvert a democratic process, and to something else that we must either appoint people or say there is a supreme leader that should lead society without any election. So at the point where that person has to be held accountable, nobody will, because you don't allow the will of the people to take place in that particular space and society. So you've got to then agree that elections on its own is a byproduct of a long battle or fight against the ruling class in number of societies. If you point in this case that the Russian Revolution versus the French Revolution, the revolution there in those countries and many other countries has been because you have had kingdomships in number of countries, and the working class organized itself to fight that there must be a democratic election of those who must lead the working class in that particular country. And if elections today are not seen in the same way people fought so hard for, then there's a challenge. There's no dispute, however, that because elections is a contested space, those that are in the ruling position and those that are in the oppressed position are constantly fighting against each other during that period, that those that are in the ruling position can use media, can use money, can use many other things to influence the outcome of the elections. But let's not now make a mistake of suggesting that elections are all of a sudden not a necessary tool for whether society or even students in an institution to take decisions. If we make it very practical, and this is why we requested that we must talk about SRC elections so that people can have a broader understanding of how the society is organized outside. If we wake up tomorrow and decide there shouldn't be SRC election in the university, what should be there? You know, should we score people in terms of their performance in class and say this one should lead because they have passed? You know, what should be the best method to put representatives of the students who must be consulted by management on decisions, not even consulted, because there's what we call cooperative governance in terms of universities. Higher Education Act and what the so-called council that is spoken about, there's a need for clarity even there of how is it organized, that body. It is not a body where perhaps companies are appointing people to go sit there and say speak and decide on what should happen in the university. You've got 5 people who could be appointed by the minister, a minister who's a byproduct of an election process, elected. The ruling party in the country is entrusted right by the people to confidently direct higher education as well. So the minister will then appoint 5 people to go sit in council to advance also what could be the interest of the ruling party. But those 5 people are not the majority. If the ruling party takes a decision that could compromise that university, they are still not in majority. You will then have a situation where we just came out of convocation. We elected 2 graduates of the university to also be part of that particular body. You then have SRC that must forward 2 that must be part of that particular body. You have academic staff who's elected by workers in that university to go represent their own space. You have non-academic who must go and represent. You ultimately, until you then have those that are experts in the areas that could be finance and so forth and so on. Now, when you look at that body must sit together and say, what is it that is in the interest of the university? Of course, these bodies, historically, they've been very reactionary because they've been organized in the most corporate, elitist form. That their own way it is to say, save the university against anything that looks bad. But it has not always been the case that students sit in council. It has not always been the case that workers sit in council. It has not always been the case. It is a process that workers and students fought for. Now that it is there, how is it used to the best interest of the students and workers? And that's why we have made some of these spaces very popular to a point that even those that are going to serve in council through convocation can have a sense of being held accountable, because if in the past they were nominated only, you wouldn't have had a way in which you hold them accountable over certain decisions of the university. There was a point in the university where there was a discussion about Israel having a role in terms of funding in the university. And the university council had to take a decision to pledge solidarity with Palestine and end its relation with Israel. Now, this is council that, if really entirely we are to look at it in the context of the so-called reactionary body, then we miss an opportunity to actually fight that it must be as transformed as we wish it to be. So that's why it's very important to define what is this university that we are looking for. Because if we don't define that university, then we're going to be fighting an endless battle that at no point will we ever agree that we have registered any progress. The last input that I want to make, Comrade Sfundo, is that...
Well, let's leave it there for now. That was part 1 of the roundtable engagement, and we can pick up where we left off in part 2. Listen to it on SoundCloud or YouTube. Simply search Katlego Opining Podcast or Roundtable.